Hello, welcome back to the Geopolitical Conversations in Addis Ababa. Your regular hosts here, we are Bezawit and Haptamu from Life World Living Consultancy, Education and Training, the Media Wing. We are honored to host the esteemed Turkish Embassy for this second round of discussions. As the world grapples with a multipolar order, Turkey's unique position at the crossroads of continents and its active role in international affairs makes its insights invaluable. Building upon the insightful conversation at the inaugural episode with our guests who share their insights on geopolitical shifts, that is the Belgium Embassy, and their global implications, today we shift gears and delve into the evolving global landscape from the perspective of a key regional player, Turkey. Joining us today are two distinguished guests. The first one is Associate Professor Dr. Elem Ayrij Tebejikal-Olu, who is the head of the Area Studies Department at Social Sciences Universities of Ankara, Turkey. She's also an Associate Professor at the Department of African Studies, Postdoctoral Studies at the Center of African Studies, University of Cape Town, South Africa, between 2014 and 15. She has published widely on topics relating to African politics, Turkey-Africa relations, and emerging powers in Africa. She is the co-editor of Turkey in Africa, a new emerging power, Routledge 2021, and Turkey's pivot to the African continent, Strategic Crossroads, Routledge 2024. Welcome, Professor. Our second esteemed guest is Professor Dr. Ali Onur Tebejikal-Olu, an Associate Professor at the Department of International Relations, Ege University, Izmir, Turkey, with PhD on International Relations from Middle East Technical University in 2016. He has been a visiting scholar at Addis University, Denmark, and University of Cape Town, South Africa in 2014 to 15. His main areas of study include international relations theory, the English School, African Affairs, and Turkey-Africa relations. He is the co-editor of Turkey in Africa, a new emerging power, London and New York, Routledge 2021. Welcome, Professor. Thank you for joining us today. The past few years have seen Africa rise in prominence, demanding greater representation and a stronger voice in shaping the global agenda. In this second episode, we will explore how these dynamics intersect with Turkey's strategic vision and its growing ties with African nations. Get ready for stimulating conversation as we unpack the complexities of the changing global order, Africa's evolving role, and Turkey's strategic positioning within this dynamic landscape. So our first question goes to Professor Ali. Professor, the question is, how do you identify key geopolitical developments in world politics?
Thank you. I think there are numerous challenges, but I will only talk about three of them, three that I find the most pressing, most challenging. The first one is, I think, power transition in the current international system. Power transition is a topic that occupies the top of the list for a long time. However, this time we are facing a different type of power transition. And this power transition is not solely a change in power distribution. This time, it can be identified as a change in the very essence of international society. Being militarily and economically powerful no longer means you can dominate the entire international system or you can dominate all issues in the international agenda. Smaller powers in this currently changing international setting can also play important roles in issue-specific areas, especially in areas where they have comparative advantage. Moreover, smaller or emerging powers, this is a concept that we use a lot in international relations today, demand serious change in global governance mechanisms, specifically by their way of conducting international politics. And these smaller or rising powers have their own specific way of conducting international politics, such as combining security and development. They adopt a no strings attached aid policy, development policy as well, development assistance policy. They highly invest on soft power. And by these assets, I think, they prove that they can provide or contribute to the international order. And based on these assets and based on their ongoing experience, I think, this smaller or rising power, they simply don't want to be ignored in this international governance mechanisms. So I think this is one of the very important challenges, this power transition and the nature of power transition that we face today. The second one is a more recent and more concrete one, which is the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. This is again important for a number of reasons, and also again challenging in international politics for a number of reasons. First, this war, I think, once more showed us how fragile are mechanisms that observe international peace when it comes to simple balance of power game. As many of the listeners would know, balance of power is in international relations usually treated as an automatic mechanism that prevents war from happening. However, I think this Russia-Ukraine war have showed us this balance of power game is quite fragile and it is insufficient, especially in providing peace. So I think the world needs more robust mechanisms to ensure peace and stability. Second thing this Russia-Ukraine war showed us, and the second challenge I think posed by this Russia-Ukraine war, is its potential to prove European security's robustness. I think Europe and the European Union will need to respond to such security risks in the future more seriously. And they have to build their capacity. And also the third repercussion maybe of this Russia-Ukraine war was on the global stage. And this war showed us that such events felt stronger than ever before because the world is more integrated, especially when it comes to food security, especially in the Horn of Africa, for example. These kind of events showed us how pressing this kind of wars and conflicts can be for the more fragile parts of the world. And the third most pressing issue, I think, out of the other ones, is the ongoing Gaza war or the Israeli actions in Gaza. I think this is an ongoing test to international society. And the question I think in here is, will the international society be more thick in terms of moral grounds, or will it be more thin, allowing the stronger to do whatever they want to do, even in the most inhumane way? This is also, I think, related to the course of the ongoing change that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Professor Ali. So what kind of a role can Turkey play in addressing global issues?
I think Turkey is one of the rising powers that I mentioned in the first question. And by adhering to this role, Turkey can play a very important part in this new global setting. Because I think Turkey can play an important role because it is an actor that can talk to anyone. It also acts in a proactive manner, especially when it comes to the issues where international events have repercussions on the less developed parts of the world. I think Turkey's this role can be best understood by looking at the grain corridor deal. As the war started in Russia-Ukraine, especially in some parts of the world, especially in the Horn of Africa, food security risk has emerged. However, Turkey intervened together with the UN and brokered the deal. So I think this shows how Turkey can contribute to these global challenging issues. Turkey can also contribute to the moral change that international society is undergoing. Turkey insists on equal treatment in front of international law, and I think this is valuable. And I think this is why Turkey joined South Africa to show how serious it is in South Africa's case against Israel for the war crimes in international Court of Justice.
Thank you, Professor, for articulating Turkey's role in global issues. So, what sort of reforming global governance mechanisms can bring along more stability to global affairs?
Thank you for the question. I think this is, again, one of the most challenging issues that we face in the global affairs today. Because it's true that, I think everyone would agree with that, current global governance mechanisms fall short in addressing global crises. They are usually biased and their problem-solving capacity is limited because of their structure. Most of the time, I'm referring here to the United Nations Security Council and the veto power of the Permanent Five. So, a reform should be in a way to make these international governance institutions more inclusive, less biased, and more effective. Especially setting the criteria for when to act and what to do when acting in this sort of mechanisms is crucial. Because most of the time, these mechanisms are so slow in taking action. In most of the cases where United Nations Security Council take an action, for example, we see that the damage is already done. So any kind of reform should address this issue. Second, these institutions should be reformed in a way to represent less heard voices of international society, such as Africa. These regions and countries definitely need their say in international politics, and it is not fair to leave their fate, in some cases, to the external powers. So any sort of reform that we should make in the global governance mechanisms, I think includes these countries and these countries' way of understanding international politics.
Thank you very much, Professor Ali. Now coming to Professor Elam, my first question would be, why do African countries demand reform in global governance mechanisms?
Well, African countries have been demanding reform at global governance institutions for many years now, most notably at the UN Security Council, but at the decision-making processes of IFIs as well, international financial institutions, being International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and World Trade Organization. So they do demand reform because African countries are not equally or adequately represented at those institutions. This demand for the reform is actually enshrined at the Esloveni Consensus of the African Union adopted at 2005. They do demand 2 permanent seats and 5 non-permanent seats with veto power granted to the former group. So this is also not only because African countries now form the majority of UN members, being one of the largest regional groups at the UN General Assembly, or due to the continent's substantial population size, but it is also because United Nations Security Council's agenda is dominated by African issues. So Africa's underrepresentation in the Council continues to impede the African Union's capacity to effectively tackle with the conflicts and humanitarian crisis across the continent. African countries therefore do not only demand more seats at the Council, but they also request larger influence at the Council for their voice to be heard. So they do demand more representation at the decision-making processes that affect them directly. To summarize, here the quest is to have a larger say or larger influence on global issues and to be an important contributing actor to the emerging global order.
Thank you, Professor Elam. So, what are the most challenging issues Africa faces today, and how can Turkey contribute in this regard?
But unfortunately, there are several challenging issues that African countries face today, including the internal conflicts, terrorist attacks, political crisis, governance problems, lack of accountability in some states, youth unemployment, economic problems, poverty, etc., while some global issues such as the war on Gaza or the Ukraine crisis, they also have implications, serious implications on African countries. But let me focus on a few of those cases or examples. For example, I think we should start from Sudan. The country is experiencing the world's largest humanitarian crisis because Sudan has been engulfed in civil war since fighting erupted in April last year between the nation's military and the military Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces. So a year into the civil war, more than 8 million people have been displaced. So this simply means that the country is also experiencing one of the world's largest displacement crises as well. So this is coupled with the looming famine. Meanwhile, neighboring countries have taken more than 1 million refugees, risking broader destabilization across the Horn of Africa and Sahel regions. And it is also estimated that about 25 million people, of whom 14 million are children, need humanitarian assistance, while more than 1/3 of the country's population are facing acute food insecurity. There are also, as defined by some UNF officials, coup epidemics or coup cascade, especially in the Sahel region. African countries actually have experienced more than 200 coup d'etats after the mid-1960s, with half of them being successful. This also means that 45 African countries experienced at least one coup d'etat or one coup attempt after their independence. Those coup d'etats create instability in the neighboring countries as well, and this is combined with the withdrawal of all Western-led missions, which is also coupled with the regional efforts that have been shattered. And there are also increasing terrorist attacks. We know that there are those terrorist groups affiliated with ISIS, while some of those groups are affiliated with Al-Qaeda. There's Al-Shabaab in the east, while Boko Haram is an important threat for Nigeria and for the neighboring countries as well. So over the last 15 years, fatalities in terrorist attacks in the Sahel region have surged by over 20-fold. And Sahel region is now the epicenter of terrorism, accounting for more terrorism-related deaths in 2022 than both South Asia and MENA combined. How can Turkey contribute in this regard in challenging Africa's problems or security issues? I think we should start from the security landscape first, because Turkey has several military or security cooperation agreements with nearly 30 African countries, and security cooperation often come in the form of military training. And Turkey also contributes to some multinational or UN-led missions, including UN peacekeeping operations or the Combined Task Force 151 that is responsible to address piracy-related attacks or terrorist attacks of the Somalia coast and the Arabian Sea. And Turkey can also contribute in the education domain because Turkey's YTB, Turkey's Presidency for Turks Abroad and related communities, has been providing scholarship opportunities to African students under its comprehensive Turkey scholarship program, while Turkey's Marif Foundation is also responsible from opening Turkish schools abroad. Marif now has 175 schools scattered around different African countries, and there are also several other public institutions that distribute scholarship opportunities to African students, be they at the level of undergraduate or graduate level. And another area of cooperation between Turkey and Africa related to economic matters, including investments and trade ties. Turkey's foreign direct investments in Africa exceeded $6 billion, while the projects assumed by Turkish companies are worth $85 billion. Turkey is increasing its trade relations with African countries as well. We see that trade is on the rise, especially with sub-Saharan African countries. Before, I think it was 20 years ago, the trade with the whole continent was merely $3 billion, while now we see a tenfold increase. And Turkish companies, they often operate in the construction or textile or manufacturing sectors, but now we see that Turkish companies, energy companies, they have also increased their operations, especially over the past decade.
Professor, thank you for articulating what the challenges Africa faces and Turkey's contribution. So what role can Africa play in emerging global order? And you may add some points about the prospects and recommendations you have.
Well, African countries have been long discontent with the existing multilateral system. So as we discussed before, they do demand reform at the global governance institutions. But Africa is also poised to play a crucial role in the emerging global order due to several factors such as demographic strength, economic potential, its abundant natural resources, or strategic geopolitical position. Let us start from the demographic factor. Because Africa has the youngest population in the world. We know that Africa's population is now above 1 billion, but it is estimated that it will exceed 2 billion within the following 3 decades. So this population, 62% of the population, is now below 25 years old. And within the following 3 decades, by 2050, it is believed that the half of the population will be below 20 years old. This is an important drive for global markets. I know that we should also create employment for this young population, but if we invest in this human capital and invest in the education opportunities, so this will drive economic expansion, and if investments in education and skills development are prioritized. And there is also the issue of rapid urbanization we see in African capitals. So this also enables them to become centers for economic activity and innovation. There's also the economic factor, because Africa's economies are among the fastest growing economies in the world, including that of Ethiopia, Nigeria, Kenya, or South Africa. So they are becoming significant economic players, and this also attracts foreign investments and drives global economic growth. And when we talk about being a trade hub, African continental free trade area is an important development in this regard, because the aim is to increase intra-Africa trade, but it will most probably increase trade relations and investments between Africa and the rest of the world. So Africa will become a more attractive destination for global trade and investments. And when we talk about natural resources, we always say that Africa is very rich in essential minerals, critical minerals, and it has significant energy resources. That is critical for global industries, and including technology or renewable energy sectors. Africa also has large forests and vast arable lands, thus has the potential to be a global breadbasket and thus significantly contribute to global food security. Let me proceed with its geopolitical importance and influence, because African nations are increasingly forming strategic partnerships with several global players, including Turkey, China, European Union, the United States, but with other emerging economies as well, such as Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and other Asian powers, and Brazil as well. So these relationships are also crucial for the political and economic stability. And I know that it's not going to be an easy thing to do that, to initiate reform at global governance institutions. It will require time, and it requires concerted and integrated efforts of African companies that have different priorities or different agendas or different national interests. But I have to say that I am very optimistic in this regard.
Thank you very much, both Professor Ali and Professor Elem, for your invaluable contribution to this second episode of the Geopolitical Conversation podcast. The initiative of Geopolitical Conversations in Addis Ababa highlights the importance of fostering dialogue, particularly during times of global change. Today's discussion with our guests from the Turkish Embassy is a testament to the power of open exchange. By understanding diverse perspectives and strategic visions, we can work towards a more stable and prosperous future for all. Thank you for joining us, and remember, these conversations are just the beginning. Let's continue building bridges of understanding, one conversation at a time. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll delve into the next interesting topic with another esteemed guest. Until then, keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts on social media using Geopolitical Conversations. Goodbye.